Today on the Marketplace of Ideas, a conversation with blogger, critic, podcaster, and intellectual shock jock Edward Champion, host of the Bat Segundo Show. It's the Marketplace of Ideas. I'm Colin Marshall. We are continuing today, interviewing the interviewers, with Edward Champion, host of the literary and cultural podcast, The Bat Segundo Show. He's also a critic and a blogger. He's behind the literary and cultural blog Reluctant Habits. Ed, welcome to the program.
Colin, thanks for having me. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing quite well this not too early morning, but it's nice and 11 over there, right?
Yes, it's 11, and it's quite early because I had insomnia last night, so perhaps the two of us may be linked in the course of this conversation, and I think we'll have a good time.
Awesome. We're psychologically synced up. Now,
fantastic.
You are known mostly as a book guy, a guy who interviews authors of novels and such, and a guy who writes about books, but it's more than that because you talk to filmmakers, you write about film. What's your cultural purview in its entirety? Or maybe it's easier to say, what don't you cover?
Well, that's actually a good question, and it is something that has come up from time to time with various readers and listeners. First of all, books or film or any kind of artistic medium is really just a prism with which to look at the larger equation of humanity, the larger scope of feelings and ideas and concepts. See, that's really what I'm interested in. Books just happen to be the way I kind of squeeze my way into this rather broad and expansive niche. And broad and expansive niche is kind of an oxymoron, but nevertheless, it does give you a sense of how this works. I essentially interview or write or do anything in relation to journalism or coverage of any sort if it's fun, if it's something that's going to totally jazz my brain or geek me out or whatnot. If I'm going to have a conversation with someone because I want it to be a fun experience so that this fun experience can then essentially transmit over to the listener or the reader. Because this is not really about me essentially flogging my own particular opinions, which, you know, by the way, despite the fact that they do come across forceful, are, of course, subject to change. And I learn immensely valuable things from the readers and the listeners who constantly change my mind. It's fantastic. And hopefully I can present a sliver of a perspective which they might consider their particular place on the spectrum or their particular view of the universe. The point is that if it weren't books, it could be stamps, it could be beer bottles, it could be alarm clocks. What the important thing is to go into this and to have a sort of a ceaseless curiosity and a sense of passion, a sense of ardor, and a sense of being able to frame these things within the context of an argument or a position so that, you know, other people can run with the ball and run from your ideas, or you can run from their ideas, and it's a magical thing, the internet, I think.
So even if the feds showed up at your door and said, Champion, you're not going to be talking about any more books on Segundo, you would still be okay. You would have enough to talk about with people if you didn't talk to authors or didn't talk about books.
Well, I don't know if you could. You're going to have to pry the books from my dead hands, like Charlton Heston. I don't know if I could quite do that. However, having said that, you raised 2 points in this question. One, I should point out that books seem to be one of those rare mediums in which you get to have access to a person's perspective in a manner that is absolutely intimate, absolutely specific, and allows you to just really lose sight of your own position, your own perspective, your own worldview, and just completely subsume yourself into something you may never have even considered about the world that we live in. And it's just such a particular medium that has lasted so wonderfully and so long, since the Gutenberg Bible, that you go ahead and have to say to yourself, well, this why does this work so well? I mean, I'm kind of on the fence on the ebooks argument. That's a whole nother ball of wax. I mean, if it helps people to have this kind of, this view into other viewpoints, I think that's fantastic. Having said that, I am an adaptive personality. I do need to wander from time to time. I can't just write or concentrate upon one thing because you don't want to get stuck in one subject or one topic or even one viewpoint, because you need to go ahead. My big belief is that you should really shift your position from time to time, or shift your emphasis from time to time, just because you don't want to get complacent or you don't want to get in the habit of thinking along the lines of one trajectory or one strain. So that's kind of my view on that.
What then, to put you on the spot here for a moment, what are some of the works that representatively jazz your brain? Or works or authors? What really is an example of something that you will go to the ends of the earth to have a conversation about on your show?
Well, it all depends. I mean, you're suggesting that there is some sort of Mount Everest of ideas or concepts that one must climb, and I don't view it that way. I'm actually looking for the mountain that nobody else has found. Having said that, however, there are a number of authors and a number of thinkers who, totally jazz my brain, totally geek me out, totally get me thinking about the world we live in. I mean, Nicholson Baker is probably the guy who comes to mind first and foremost. Richard Powers, people who have these extraordinary observations about the smallest things that are frequently ignored. I'm obviously a big booster of William Vollmann for the same reason. Here's a man who has devoted the entirety of his career towards pursuing perspectives that really aren't covered in literature and aren't covered in books. I on the film front, I really am fascinated with whatever David Lynch or Mike Leigh has to say. I'm fascinated with Marilyn Robinson's views of faith and how this you end up kind of entering into this world where your own particular. I'm a secular guy, so that's why I like her works. I'm really fascinated to know where a person of faith stands. I'm not the kind of guy who wants to constantly have his viewpoints agreed with. I just don't think that's particularly interesting. I don't think that any thinking person on this planet can really take such a position in all seriousness. I mean, you have to have a sense of curiosity, a sense of passion, and a sense, I suppose, of just trying to go ahead and look out for something. Unfortunately, when we have terrible labels applied to, say, the hipster, and the notion of this slacker mentality that was celebrated 20 years ago by the likes of Richard Linklater and the type, has now transmuted into a scenario in which there's this aesthetic judgment that is now cast upon someone who is just simply curious about things, and now that notion of curiosity becomes trend-setting, or you're now subscribing to a particular label. And I find this just to be one of the saddest developments of the last 10 years, and I also see this very rampant in the media world. My hope with Bat Segundo and all of my offerings is I can combat this a little bit, and I can get people considering, like, hey, have you heard this particular guy? I mean, like, I interviewed Nick Antosca because he wrote a really strange novel, and I just wanted to find out what his perspective was. It was an extremely strange conversation, but nevertheless, I feel that you need that kind of conversation. You need to listen to that once in a while. I mean, there are nearly 300 shows that you can listen to in the Bat Segundo archive. I'm sure that one of those 300 weird perspectives will possibly get you to maybe think a little bit differently about the world we live in. I hope, at least, Now,
do you find that even to this very day, the cultural curiosity is as stigmatized? I was told by a trend piece that geeking is in.
Well, geeking is in, but geeking is also now a market demographic. It used to be, I mean, and this probably has a lot to do with the internet and being able to track specific trends in a manner that you just you couldn't do when you used to. I mean, back in the days, in the 80s and the 90s, we were tape traders. We went ahead and sent weird magazines in the mail to other geeks. And there was a sense of really being marginalized and being part of some underworld and being, I guess just transmitting information and feelings to each other. And that has now become quite public. So while geeking may be in, geeking is now a demographic that is really intended to sell things to people, as opposed to get people fired up about, or jazzed up, which seems to be the phrase of this conversation, getting them really sort of fired up about the world we live in and all the many perspectives. I'm really saddened by this, and I often find, however, that I somehow stumble upon an author or a film or a filmmaker, and 3 months after I have found that particular person, I'm on to something else. And I sometimes find that person has become the sort of great anointed cultural icon. And it's really kind of strange to me. I mean, can't we just enjoy people's works and their art simply because they are doing this. I just find that this association with marketing and advertising, and I don't really have anything to say on the subject that hasn't been said already, but I do find this to be troublesome. I do find, for example, right now, I think that the independent movement of the internet, with the initial wave of lit blogs, has kind of fallen asunder, and now we see this fragmentation, and we see this scenario in which the bloggers are often boosters of authors, as opposed to wanting to sit down with them and think and challenge their assumptions and get their own assumptions challenged. I find this to be a really sad and terrible development, personally.
You see the bloggers becoming more cheerleaders than conversationalists?
On my blog, for example, I have hosted a number of roundtable discussions, and the purpose of these roundtable discussions is not to have 15 or 20 people agreeing about a book. It's to get those 15 to 20 people really kind of sinking their teeth on a book, and if they liked it or they disliked it, that's fine. But we can sit here and talk about it and try to make sense of it. I find really that there is a really terrible decline in civil disagreement. So much so that we're now almost afraid to disagree with each other. I kind of see this in relation to, I suppose, the rise of Obama. I mean, look, I voted for Obama, and I'm Democratic-leaning. However, I do feel that we should probably be calling Obama on some of the policies that he's made. I mean, if you're a journalist, you're constantly challenging your own assumptions. And I look to, the political blogosphere, for example, like the Daily Kos and, Atrios, and I see them essentially agreeing with Obama. And I look at someone like Glenn Greenwald, who is actually challenging Obama in the same way that he challenged Bush. And I think that's a far more healthier climate of exchanging ideas, or going into this marketplace of ideas, which in this condemnation of the marketplace, we hadn't even factored into the title of your show.
Oh yes. Now, there seems to be a sentiment, though, in the book blogging world, and let's just say the whole literary internet sphere, that, well, only a dozen people are still reading. So if we slag on any book, or even if we just question a book, we might stop them all reading and kill books forever.
Well, I don't necessarily agree with that.
Well, nor do I, but that seems to be kind of what I hear from people.
Yeah, but I think that, first of all, look, if you don't like Stephenie Meyer, find out why somebody does like Stephenie Meyer. Find out what it is about Stephenie Meyer that gets someone excited about that. And that, I've had conversations with people who read Stephenie Meyer. Not my cup of tea, but I've managed to actually successfully convince them to try out, hey, you might want to, read Edgar Allan Poe or H.P. Lovecraft, and they have, and I've seen them come back with the books in their hands. We go ahead and sneer down at, for example, people who read the sports page in the New York Post, as if there is nothing redeemable there. But we don't actually stop to consider, well, maybe there might actually be something redeemable there. And in considering what is redeemable, or considering what gets people excited about something, you don't necessarily have to throw away your discrimination or your ability to be critical about something, but you can at least just sort of stop and say, well, this person is enjoying this particular article, or this particular book, or this particular story, or this particular song, or this particular film, and you could say, well, why is that? And can we actually, maybe I can learn something from them, maybe they can learn something from me. That's kind of the democracy that I hope that the internet can continue to do, and it has done, I think, in its infinite wisdom. I mean, sometimes the whole wonders of the whole wonderful aspect of this medium is that you on any given day discover something about the world or life or a perspective that you just didn't know about, and I think it's our position, or it's our responsibility to really continue to throw the net as wide as possible, and to just really consider everything. That's just, and then that's a rather ambitious task, of course, but it is something I think that I don't think is particularly valued in this nation. Here we are, we're living in a nation, and if you go to any other country, like France, for example, not only will you have something like the Ministry of Culture, but you will also have thinkers and writers on the currency. And here we have nothing but, politicians and former presidents. Why can't we have a writer on our currency? I mean, I think something as basic as that says everything you need to know about our culture. And it also is the very thing we constantly need to be aware of when considering any marketplace of ideas. I mean, there is no marketplace of ideas on a sort of base general level. Your transaction involves the acquisition of products, but you don't consider the transactions that don't involve money at all, that just involve just soaking up ideas and transmitting ideas, and perhaps with social networks and the like, with something like Twitter, which I find to be very valuable, we might be able to, I suppose, restore some of this mentality, which I think is pretty much where our country was predicated upon. It was predicated upon the exchange of ideas without currency. And I don't know. I think I'm kind of now suspicious of the title of your show now, sir.
Well, yeah, the title, the show has kind of drifted from its title since day one. But people start to learn the title, and you're stuck with it at a certain point. I'm sure you get tired of the words Bat Segundo every once in a while, but you come back to them.
Oh no, I love the words Bat Segundo. I think you probably do really love the words the marketplace of ideas. I think you're selling yourself short. That's what I think.
I have to say the words a lot, but back to Bat Segundo. Now that I think about it, you started this program in, I believe, 2004. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the pre-Cambrian era of podcasting. How did you even know what to do at that time?
I really didn't know what to do. I mean, so here's what happened. The Bat Segundo Show really started off as a shameless excuse for me to interview David Mitchell, a novelist who I find to be one of the great writers of today, and in fact, I'm very excited. He's got another mammoth novel about coming next year, which I'm really excited about. A hugely ambitious novelist, and I wanted to interview the man. I don't quite recall precisely why I had to do it in audio format, except I had a kind of hunch that there was this podcasting thing that people were doing, and I happened to have some extremely crude equipment, a mini disc recorder, and some Radio Shack mics. Although, actually, the mic that I have right now that I continue to use is a Radio Shack mic stand. These are great. They work wonders. But the point being that this started off as a very ramshackle way, and I didn't really know what I was doing, and yet I kept getting publicists emailing me, hey, this author happens to be coming through town. Would you like to talk with them? Apparently, there was some word spread that I was interviewing people. And truthfully, I really didn't know quite what I was doing. I just had a hunch that I wanted to have conversations that were a little bit different, that were a little bit more expansive, that were essentially for readers and by readers. And word of my exploits seemed to spread. And I really don't think I knew what I was doing until I interviewed John Updike in show number 50. That, to me, was the point when I realized, this Bat Segundo thing, maybe this is actually meaningful in some sense. Maybe it is a serious endeavor. I mean, my attitude for anything I do is to simply just do it and figure out through the course of doing it what precisely it is, and simply not think about whether it's good or bad. I mean, obviously I apply a level of quality, and I think that as the shows have continued, I have started to make them a lot more freewheeling and spontaneous, and they've become progressively stranger, but I think more interesting as well, because now in order for this show to continue to be fun for me and fun for the listeners, I really have to keep myself on my toes, and I really have to constantly challenge the expectations of what this program is about. I still very much enjoy doing it, and if I didn't enjoy doing this, I simply wouldn't do it. I mean, there is no reason for me or anybody to be at this unless you really enjoy doing it and you can put some level of passion or some level of emotion or some level of truth into the program, because, anybody can go ahead and set up a radio show and essentially read boilerplate questions and essentially, go ahead and feed into the junketeer system. That's the easy way to do things, and I'm not very much interested in doing things the easy way. I don't think anybody should do things the easy way, and I'm suspicious even when I will write something that takes a small amount of time. And yet those often become the essays that are widely talked about, much to my I'm not exactly chagrin, but surprise, certainly, because something I will labor on for maybe half a day or even like 2 days or something will not even be read at all. And I don't know. I feel that if you don't have an increasing evolution in what you do, and you don't have a commitment to giving it your all and to putting all of your passion into something, you really shouldn't be doing it, because you're just as easily replaceable as anybody else. We should not be cogs. We have this ability to really do something joyful and different, and that is essentially what I've tried to do with all of my offerings. I hope I've kind of touched into the genesis of Segundo, but if you have specific questions, I have a tendency to ramble, as you can see. Please feel free to interject. I'm sorry.
That idea of jumping into things without worrying too much about how they're going to turn out, not in a specific way, and just hoping for the best as far as evolution and keeping them iterating, is one that I'm totally down with, 100%. But it is fascinating to me that you had publicists knocking on your door so quickly. I actually pictured you trying to tell a publicist what a podcast was in 2004, and it was a grim picture to me, but they were actually coming to you fairly soon.
Well, they were and they weren't. I mean, it depended on the author. What happened is I received a very low-tier small press authors who immediately, in fact, actually, people like Richard Nash he's no longer at Soft Skull, but when he was at Soft Skull, he immediately understood that he continued to understand throughout the course of his tenure that blogs and podcasts really were a way to get the word out on authors, and that they were these wonderful alternative mediums in which you could probably get more coverage and more substantive coverage. So he came to me very quick. In fact, I would argue that he was probably one of the first guys knocking on my door. But for a few other people, for when I tried to get bigger names, I would simply just go ahead and assume that nobody would ever want to, be interviewed by me. I just would call publicists and email them, and I wouldn't be an ass about it. I would continue to do it in a sort of progressively persistent way. I am a tenacious guy, and I am known to continue to call until I get a yes or a no. And I continue to do that, and to my surprise, people like Bret Easton Ellis and T.C. Boyle, like really within the first 10 shows, actually, I could talk with these people for like 30 minutes, and I was sort of shocked by it. And I just continue to do it. And I continue to do it to this very day. I mean, there are some publicists who simply do not get podcasts, even to this very day, and who do not get Bat Segundo, despite the fact that I have interviewed a number of notable people. In fact, I would argue that I think the mid-list authors are the hardest to get on the show. They're hard to get. I mean, like for David Lynch, it was ridiculously easy. I called up, and within 5 minutes, we had set down the location and the time, and I was stunned by this, and I'm not even certain how that happened. I suspect it has something to do with the fact that most journalists in the San Francisco area were terrified about talking to David Lynch about TM, and thinking that would be the entirety of their conversation. But you have to understand something, and this is something I've understood always about Segundo. TM is very important to David Lynch. It's part of his artistic process. And so, you have to understand that this is an essential part of him. And if you have a person on your program, you have to understand that it's not just about a book, that there are aspects about that person that you have to talk about. I have no problem talking about those aspects. I am challenging about those aspects. I did ask David Lynch, do you understand your own films? Because I was surprised that nobody had offered that question. It seemed a very fair one to do, But that's kind of how it's been. And obviously with publicists, you do have to, establish relations. They have to understand what you're doing. But I found on the book side that, I'd say like 60% of the publicists I work with really dig the show or at least understand the show. There are some publicists who really think I'm the most evil man in the literary world, who refuse to take my calls, who refuse to take my emails, and who deny me authors. I've had authors denied to me because of some, paragraph I wrote 4 years ago that I don't even remember, in which I went ahead and criticized them for some piece that they wrote. And because of this is, I guess, the burden of the internet, because of that, they then say, well, you wrote about this particular person in 2004, and as such, I don't know if I could trust you today in 2009. First of all, I'm a lot different now, 5 years later. Second of all, I'm talking to them predominantly about the latest book that they have put out. This is not an excuse to essentially sandbag them for something that they have written 5 years ago. They probably don't even care about as much unless they've updated that particular stance. And really, it is as much about capturing the person in the present as it is about, I suppose, capturing the complete works. And so I think a lot of it also has to do with this. I discovered during the course of doing this that, apparently you're supposed to, if you're on NPR, you're supposed to pre-script these interviews. You just have to have questions in advance. I was like, what? No, the whole point of talking is to just have a kind of weird conversation in advance and not let the other person know what you're talking about, and they may come up with something, and then your questions will shift. And it was to my great surprise to learn that, not only does NPR have the pre-interview where and you're handed a list of questions in advance. That's amazing to me. But that they also have people. They train their interviewers, of course, to talk in a certain way. And they spend a good deal of money doing this every year. And it's like, why would you do that? Why would you try to essentially warp the natural way in which people talk? I mean, and my job as an interviewer is to get a guest off the boilerplate as soon as I can. And it's often very easy to do because you can go ahead and look at all the interviews that a person has done, and you can see the same 5 questions that they're asked. No, I'm not interested in those 5 questions. I'm interested in something that has... these people have labored on a book for years. You have some responsibility to read that book and to talk with them about it, and yet so many journalists don't do this. I talked with an author yesterday, as a matter of fact, and I was checking out some other interviewers that this author has done, and I was shocked to see the person at the very beginning say, "Oh, by the way, I've only read half of your book, so please, no spoilers." And I'm like, are you that much of a moron? I mean, here's a person who has been nominated for prizes, who is a very good author, and you would do something like that? I mean, what are you thinking?
That's quite beyond the pale. You've brought up so many points about interviewing, and by the way, I agree with them all, and I try to follow them myself. I mean, I don't script questions on this show. I don't say no spoilers because I haven't read the book, because I have in fact read the book.
Yeah.
And the issue of how much of a person you should be is something that I talk to other interviewers about, because for other interviewers, it kind of is an issue. It sounds like it's a question that you went into the game not really worrying about, but it's one of interviewers asking themselves, how much me should I bring to the table, and how much capital I interviewer should I be? It sounds like you've never had this question in your head, though.
Well, yes and no. I mean, it hasn't been something that I have dwelled upon, but I should be honest with you. I mean, you're asking me honest questions, and you have a good show, and I feel I have to be honest. When I started doing the Bat Segundo Show, because I didn't really have any guide as to how to be an interviewer, aside from memories of seeing various video clips of Dick Cavett and Tom Snyder and Mike Wallace, and having something of a theatrical background. I mean, I did some acting, and I have written and directed things and the like. But I kind of came into this with us, and also, sometimes yes, I think it's still an issue with me. And it's why I like to create. Why I like to write things in different voices. I do have a particular issue with being entirely myself. I have become better at being who I am because there's a lot of good things that come with that, and there are a lot of bad things that come with that. But you have to be who you are because why be some sanitized individual? Those aren't the people who change things. Those aren't the people who make waves. So I started Bat Segundo with this conception of a kind of tough interviewer. And I threw in a few weird asides, or I would always have a few odd questions because I think I was really trying to get myself out of pretending to be something. I mean, it was still me to a large extent, and it has become increasingly me. But I guess there is a sort of P.T. Barnum quality to these interviews, to the young roving correspondent. I mean, for goodness sakes, the show is called the Bat Segundo Show. There is a guy named Bat Segundo who introduces each particular segment. I don't say that this is Edward Champion interviewing these authors. I say it's our young roving correspondent, which I can't really even say our young roving correspondent because I'm losing my hair, damn it. But anyway, I'll still say that, and I'll still say that as long as I have a voice that sounds comparatively young. But the point being that, I don't know, it has something to do with just wanting the work to speak for itself to a large degree. That, if people know it's a Bat Segundo interview, I don't know if they actually know it's an Ed Champion interview, although some people associate them with Ed Champion. I actually like the idea of just there being some construct called Bat Segundo that these interviews fall into. I mean, for all I know, 5 years from now, I could have, the Joe Sixpack show or something. I could have some, Harvey the Rabbit and his amazing interview tricks. I don't know. I do like the idea of I guess having an alter ego. I've always liked the idea of having an alter ego. And it's both good and bad because on one hand it allows me to be a sort of impersonator. When I think of all the comedians I really love, they're about alter egos. Buster Keaton, Peter Sellers. These guys were geniuses, and they were very good about escaping and not giving you anything about themselves. That is both good and bad because you kind of do have to be yourself, and I think that the best interviewers have been themselves. The interviewers who are not who they are entirely, you can generally detect that. I mean, to go ahead and we had a little bit of email volley before we set this up, and I was going on about Terry Gross. If you listen, if you listen to Terry Gross's early shows, she is far different from how she is today. You get this sense of someone who's a little uncertain, someone who has kind of who came from some sort of progressive background. She kind of has a sort of spacey timbre to her voice. And I really like that Terry Gross. I really think that Terry Gross is someone who who's sending off vibes. It's really actually quite alarming. I mean, and you can detect some of these. I mean, but what's interesting is that Terry Gross has not put up a lot of those early shows on NPR, and I find that rather interesting. Is it a scenario in which she does not want to be herself? Because now we get the Terry Gross who is a little odd, and actually I would like to see her even be odder. I would like to see the Terry Gross who is crazy. And we were talking about that Drew Barrymore interview, which was just really nuts. I don't know. I mean, she was trying to find a personal way in to Drew Barrymore that I just didn't feel was applicable under the circumstances. I mean, it's not as if the role that Drew Barrymore chose for that particular production was really a personal choice. To ask her if she'd be a good mother, I mean, what bearing does that have on her work as artist in that particular spot? I mean, my feeling is this, is that if you're going to go into personal questions, it has to relate to the work. We have enough of a terrible, poisonous, noxious reality TV show atmosphere in which we're constantly invading people's privacies. We already live in this Facebook age. I mean, I'm off Facebook predominantly for this reason. I mean, do you really want to have everybody know who your birthday is? Do you really want to have everybody know about who you're dating? I mean, the notion of finding out about someone's engagement online as opposed to talking with them and getting their take, it's not a matter of some sort of, data variable that you go ahead and put into a goddamn subroutine. It's something in which it has major emotional bearing on a person's life. I find this to be completely ridiculous. I mean, the notion that you can't know someone unless you have earned the right to know them. You can't just go ahead and pry into personal matters after a 15-minute conversation unless that person has said, okay, we're getting along. Let me tell you a few things. I mean, my attitude is I have never, with the exception of one person, and I had to cut the interview short because it brought up terrible memories. I may be a tough interviewer, but you will not see guests cry on my program. You will not see, you'll see a range of emotions. They'll get pissed off at me sometimes because of my questions, but I am not there to personally attack them. I'm there to challenge their ideas and their feelings, but I'm not going to be some sociopath who wants to go ahead and put a camera in their face and grill them until they completely cry, like a Barbara Walters interview. That is not my idea of a good time, nor is it particularly valuable towards understanding who these people are. These people are smart. They have some very valuable things to say, and I find this notion of prying into someone's emotions like this to be, again, it's not particularly journalistic, and it's not particularly decent, I think.
If you've just tuned in, this is the Marketplace of Ideas. I'm Colin Marshall. Be sure you check out our complete Marketplace of Ideas interview archive at colinmarshallradio.com. My guest is Edward Champion, host and producer of the Bat Segundo Show, as well as the blogger behind Edward Champion's Reluctant Habits. All this stuff is it's important that we bring out the issue of the long-form interview and how when you're working in a short form, like a 5-minute pre-interview, scripted question interview, if you want to ask a personal question, you've got to go awkwardly straight for it. But one of the advantages of the long form, like this show and like Segundo, is that, as you said, you can get to know the person a little bit more. You can enter a territory you never could in even a half an hour if you're going for, say, an hour.
Yeah,
although
go for it.
Go ahead.
Oh, go for it.
I was just going to.
And then you have moments like this in a long form interview.
That's true. I was just going to say, I was going to wonder to the extent to which you agreed with that the form gives rise to all this other good stuff.
Well, I agree that the long form interview is a good one for the simple reason that you do have tangents like this. My little rant in the last answer, for example. You wouldn't get that if I had to speak with you in 30-second sound bites. You also get in the long-form interview what we just had in that last exchange in which we were overlapping our voices and we didn't know who was talking first. See, I like moments like that. This is what conversation is all about. I have often in these long-form interviews a moment when someone actually wants to kick us out of a restaurant or kick us out of a cafe. And I leave those moments in because, the fact of the matter is that we're all overstaying our welcome in some sense.
Well, we've got to mention you're doing these in public. People might not know that. Yeah, that's one of the cool things. Go ahead and tell us how that became a thing on the show.
Well, I mean, a lot of it has to do with a kind of nouveau vague sense I had. I mean, really loving the French filmmakers who came out of the new wave, the Truffaut and Godard, and Romer and the list goes on and on. Basically, filmmakers who wanted to get a truer sense of humanity by shooting their films not in studios, but in places where people actually cohabitated. I figured anyone who might be listening to this, given the then rise of iPods, was probably going to be listening to it on their headphones. And so my attitude was, I could go ahead and try to figure out, a studio to go ahead and record these conversations in. But honestly, I had no access to a studio, so there was one major consideration. I mean, number two, though, I think that having a little bit of chatter in the background and also getting people to talk in regular environments, it does make a difference. I've found. It does get people to be truer to who they are instead of having to constantly be on boilerplate. I mean, I try to avoid situations whenever possible in which I know that I'm going to talk with a subject, and that subject is going to, basically say the same 5 points, the 5 sentences that the media trainers have drilled into their heads. This is why I don't talk with actors, for example, unless I know that the actor has a brain or has a heart or is willing to think on his toes. And honestly, I didn't come about that because I'm looking down at actors. I think actors are very talented people and do contribute greatly to films and theater and the like. But nevertheless, our celebrity culture causes us to not encourage these actors to think on their toes. And when you're constantly impersonating another character, how then can you really reveal yourself? I never go into an interview with conditions. I never go into any interview I try not to go in with an agenda. In fact, I want my opinion of a person to change, or even the opinion, and hopefully by that matter, my opinion of a listener's opinion of the person might change. I should point out, for example, I did an interview recently with Andrea Peyser, who is the notorious New York Post gossip columnist. And I went into this because, first of all, I've read Andrea Peyser's columns, and they're often quite vituperative. But I actually, wanted to know, for a person who spouts forth so much bile on the page, I mean, there's got to be something positive about her. There really has to be. And so I patiently sat down with her over the course of 40 minutes, and I did get her at the end of the interview to say a few positive things about the film industry. And she was smiling as she said these things. See, that's the kind of thing I'm interested in. Why do we go ahead and have to reinforce our assumptions about a person? I mean, and Andrea Peyser was actually, look, we disagreed politically. We disagreed conceptually. I challenged pretty much all the points that she had put into this book, Celebutards. But I did want to figure out, I read her columns, and I'm like, for goodness sakes, you can't possibly entirely think that way, can you? I mean, really? I mean, you can't have that warped a view of I mean, for goodness sakes, you get to write about movie stars. Is it always about writing about how Heath Ledger deserved to die? I mean, come on. This is utterly ridiculous. I mean, and at the same time, in asking this particular question, I also wonder if I am complicit in some sense with reinforcing this celebrity culture, which I mean, that's one thing. That's why I try to keep the number of publicists I deal with as wide as possible, because I don't want to be beholden to one particular publicist or one particular house. Even for the houses that I have to deal with, who are complete pains in the ass, I do try to deal with them, because I just don't feel that we should be talking with the same people, the same houses, the same publicists, because then we become just as much a part of the system as People Magazine, just as much a part of reinforcing where the money goes. And my view is that it's good to sort of talk with people who are big names. It's also important to talk to people who are small names, who are just starting out. There are very few interviewing opportunities for a lot of the emerging authors. But I mean, there's a guy I'm going to be talking with, next week, named Javier Calvo. I went crazy about his novel called Wonderful World, and it was translated by Mara Fay Leatham. I'm going to be talking with the two of them. They happen to be husband and wife. It's this wonderful book that is just an absolute joy to read. It has only been covered in the Chicago Sun-Times and the Dallas Morning News. Nothing in the Washington Post, nothing in the New York Times, nothing in the Los Angeles Times. This book has essentially been dumped into the marketplace of ideas, where it's this wonderful kind of and Calvo, incidentally, is a guy who has translated David Foster Wallace in Spanish. So as such, there's an interesting kind of post-DFW mentality to this book, and it's just a lot of laughs. I mean, there's all sorts of things about this book that are wonderfully funny that I can't even tell you, because it's a regular radio show. I mean, lots of body humor, lots of strange, crazy, cartoonish descriptions, but nevertheless, the kind of emotional truth that you don't often see in contemporary fiction. And so I found this book by a complete accident. I was aware that Mara Fay Leatham had translated another book which I really love called Pandora in the Congo, and I read this book and I was just laughing like crazy, and really just having a good time reading this. And I'm like, why isn't this guy getting the kind of coverage that you would think that he would deserve? Because this is a very strange and fun book. And this is the thing. Going back to what I was saying earlier about blogs once championing sort of these offbeat books, I find that we're not doing that nearly as much as we need to. I mean, that's why I set up a roundtable discussion with this author, Eric Kraft, for his latest volume in this series. He's spent decades of his life doing this book called Flying. This character named Peter Leroy, who he has tracked over the course of now 10 or 11 books, essentially. I read every one of those books, and we had ourselves a 3-part Segundo marathon conversation, because nobody else respected the fact that this guy, whose books weren't selling very well, who did this extremely ambitious Proustian Poe-like epic, who is really our Proust and Poe to a large degree, and was essentially kind of abandoned by the very people you would think would want to celebrate something that was ambitious or interesting or different. And so I just felt that, I did a roundtable discussion, I did a 3-part interview, and hopefully that provided at least a few people with this man's perspective. This guy has devoted years of his life, years upon years, to doing this. And it's like, this is the way we treat the people who are ambitious. This is the way that we treat the people who go ahead and wave their arms and say some crazy things, and they have valuable things to say about the way in which we live. This is how we treat them in our nation. Colin, man, I got to say, we got a responsibility to do better. And so that's what I try to do. And there's no money in this. But, you have to go ahead and someone has to do it. Nobody else is.
This is kind of how I feel about Alexander Theroux.
Yeah.
It's that 3-part Kraft interview. You've brought it up, and it was one of those things that I was thinking, oh, I've got to mention that. And it's one of the many things you've beaten me to mentioning, in fact, because I think of that Kraft interview, which I recently re-listened to, as kind of the... I don't know if I'm going to say the absolute pinnacle, but very much a high point and very much a representative point of what's good about the Bat Segundo Show. You can't get anywhere else. And I imagine you've gotten all kinds of feedback about that.
Well, honestly, yes and no. I mean, a few people discovered Eric Kraft through that, but again, I think a lot of it has to do with the current economy and how, and also this year is a really terrible year to be a reader. I mean, it's both a good year and a terrible year in the sense that there are so many anticipated books this year. You've got a new Lethem. You've got a new Nicholson Baker. You've got a new Richard Powers. You've got, the list goes on and on. You've got Volman's Imperial, which sits in the other room right now, this monstrous 1,300-word book that I've been reading and working at and picking at between books. But, and you got a new Pynchon, for goodness sakes. I mean, so this is a really tough year to be an author because so many of the big boys have big books coming out, and a lot of these, not all of these are going to sell, particularly since everybody's tightening their belts right now.
Yeah.
So, but you mentioned that. I thank you for mentioning that as a pinnacle. I appreciate that. I do want to do more ambitious career length interviews like that, and sometimes I have managed to get to talking with someone, and it turns into a 2-part interview. That happened with Rupert Thompson, again, another one of those authors who really should be bigger here in America, who writes some of the most distinctive books across multiple genres. I highly recommend, Death of a Murderer and the Book of Revelation, both fascinating books. And yet, what happened here in New York is that he didn't have a place to read, and I knew he was in town, and so I called around to a couple, to a couple of bookstores and say, hey, you got to get this guy. You got to get this guy reading, and you got to get this guy, going. And Maude Newton, who, of course, wonderful literary blogger, she agreed to go ahead and interview him. And it was a really nice little affair. And here was an author who was going to be essentially just sort of, he's happened to be in New York, and nobody had happened to actually set anything up with him. And we had a major conversation. Hopefully that did something to increase the man's attention. But, this is the blessings and the curse of essentially being an independent radio program. On one hand, I can do a 3-part interview with Eric Kraft simply because I'm the guy who sets the terms. But if I were broadcasting this thing on a radio network, which is all about, whether it be public or commercial, I would be beholden to a very specific format. Oh, guess what? You have a 30-minute show with which to talk with someone. I mean, Silverblatt. I would like to hear Silverblatt do like some bizarre 2.5-hour conversation, and he has turned a few of his programs into multiple parters. I would like to see Jesse Thorne interview people for like 6 hours or something. I'm really curious. I actually want to know if Jesse Thorne's got the stamina to do that. We have to increase our ambitions, but unfortunately, when your show is being distributed on a radio network and is beholden to program directors, and in Jesse Thorne's case, the poor man who is probably one of the most laid-back interviewers I think I've ever listened to, who's about as threatening as a small mouse in a cage, is considered to be some crazy, wild, feral, way out there kind of guy simply because he talks with people who are interesting, who might actually breathe some life, for goodness sakes, into NPR that is absolutely crucial and needed at this point. And I'll tell you something else, Colin, man. I have talked with program directors, and you want to know something? The people who dig Bat Segundo, who I've had conversations with, are not public radio. They're commercial radio. Oh. I went into this thinking, oh, well, this should be a nice little public radio program. But the fact remains is that and one program director said, oh, I'm sorry, you're too smart for us, which, as if too smart was a pejorative.
Yikes.
Too smart. Yeah, I know. But a friend of mine called what I do. He said, actually, Ed, you're an intellectual shock jock. And I thought about that for a minute, and I said, actually, you're kind of right. What has happened here is that Segundo is a range of influences, both highbrow and lowbrow, and they've kind of meshed together to create something that I guess is a little bit crazy, or more than a little bit crazy, and outright strange at times. I just hope that it's entertaining. I'm not out here to I don't know. It's just, you got to do something different. You got to do something that gets people going. You got to get something that gets people gripped. And I seem to be doing that on a small level, but it's also kind of a pity that we can't have more shows doing this on the radio. I mean, like, I listen, Colin, to a lot of old-time radio, and it's like an entirely different world. It's like, on commercial radio, you had really serious interviews with the politicians and figures of the time. You had really serious dramatic radio that really grips you even to this very day because, And this is running on commercial radio. And the United States is the only nation that really does not federally subsidize dramatic radio. And we value radio less and less and less. And it certainly isn't helped by the clear channelization of radio, which, again, has one guy saying different tags and different call signs all across the country from one location. I grew up with radio in which I would listen to some kind of DJ who you knew lived in the town, who would talk about regular events, and who would immediately, and I'm the kind of guy who, when I wake up, if I get a piece of information, I'm going to be just completely alert. I'm going to be kind of crazy. I'm going to be, I mean, it's almost more intoxicating than any kind of coffee, although I'm a coffee addict as well. But coffee plus that information is the ultimate in waking up. And I think that we have moved away from that in a way that is truly harmful to the nation and harmful just to regular people getting jazzed up and excited about things. And I keep using jazzed up, but maybe there is something to be said about the fact that we're comparing the idea of getting people excited about ideas to jazz as opposed to pop radio or pop music.
There's something to be explored there, certainly. But I also came up loving old-time radio, listening to all these programs from 50 years before I was born and wondering throughout childhood and adolescence what became of all this interesting stuff that used to happen on the airwaves. But don't you think, certainly you're well-placed to answer this, don't you think we're getting a lot of that interestingness back in podcasting?
Well, we are. For example, there's Dan Carlin's Hardcore History, which is a podcast I like a lot. This is a guy who is extremely, almost frighteningly passionate about history. He has got a lot of energy. He has read everything, and he's shouting at the top of his lungs about, the Magna Carta being signed, and it's great. This is what we need. It's and a lot of this has to do also, I suppose, with my personal experience. I once took, in college, I took a history class at 8 in the morning. And you think to yourself, 8 in the morning, you're going to sleep through that, right? But actually, this was one of the most brilliant professors I think I had ever seen. This guy, without any kind of coffee, at 8 in the morning, would stand in front of the class and shout at the top of his lungs, and he would absolutely convince you about the importance of history. This is something that we don't, we do see to varying degrees in podcasting, but unfortunately, when you get into areas of distribution or sponsorship, when you get into the idea of making that palatable to a mass audience, you then start to kill off that passion. Look at Grammar Girl. Look, I think it's fantastic that Grammar Girl has gone out of her way to get people thinking about grammar. But you know what? I listen to her program, and I'm immediately bored. I'm sorry. I just find her to be the most... I would have a better conversation with a librarian who's worked for 12 hours straight. I'm a guy who really likes grammar and really loves words. If you can't convey that, and the question is has it always been that way? I don't know. That's something I may have to study. But but hey, she's had some considerable success. But for goodness sakes, there are podcasters out there who constantly are on the edges, who are really just, daring to say to the world, you know what? Here's a topic that I absolutely love. Here are some people that I absolutely love talking with. And you know what? To hell with the radio. To hell with going ahead and talking like in that crazy commercial voice. And yes, we'll talk like this. No, we don't. People, when you go to a cafe, do you have a conversation like this? Because I sure as hell don't.
That's a decent imitation. I used to work in commercial radio, so I can tell you
that
is not yeah. It's funny because I'm just imagining the listener listening to this interview, and the contrast between the way the two of us talk would seem to indicate a bigger gulf between our programs.
Well, what do you mean by that?
I feel like I'm listening to you coming over your end, and you sound like a very passionate guy. And normally I think, I come across pretty passionate on my show. But then I think, well, wait a minute. I'm also by comparison, I probably sound like I should be half asleep. You know what I mean?
No. First of all, there's no right way to express passion. I just want to be clear on that. Colin, you're a good guy. I've listened to a numerous number of your interviews. I think you're doing a really good job. you're more subtle and subdued. I just happen to have been born this way, and everybody in my family maintains this ridiculous level of energy. I mean, I can tell you, friends have gone with me to to meet members of my family, and everybody is like this. And you come away, and you're basically in bed until like 1 p.m. the next day. I'm not kidding, man. I was born this way, and I have tried to sort of be. I mean, I can talk quietly. But you get me going. There's no. No reprimanding here to be done by either side. It's just as long as you talk true, that's what matters.
That is a very good way to put it. I feel like as long as the two participants in a conversation I'm listening to are being perfectly honest, that's going to be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And maybe regardless of the subject matter, although I'm not certain about that. I mean, I probably haven't listened to as many of the, as we've said, the mainstream podcasts. Oh, actually, question for you. Do you think that the mainstream podcasts, we'll call them, the ones that get really popular, get more watered down because of their popularity, or they become popular because they're a little bit watered down?
Well, I think it's actually a little bit of both, really. I mean, if you want to go ahead and make a killing at this, and you are concerned about getting the maximum number of listeners, well, of course, you're going to want to go ahead and create a program that is just as dull and lifeless as every other program. If, on the other hand, I don't know, but then again, the optimist part of me says, well, people are looking for alternatives, and you can go ahead and be completely true to that alternative voice. It may hit and may not. I mean, all the people who I have admired throughout cultural history have been the folks who had the right idea at the wrong time. I'm thinking of people like, Ray Davies of the Kinks, who is one of the most brilliant songwriters, I think, and even more brilliant at times than John Lennon, of the last 30 years. And unfortunately, he came along with some really brilliant ideas and brilliant music at the wrong time. Same thing I would argue about John Carpenter, who is now considered an amazing filmmaker on video. I mean, but when The Thing came out, people absolutely didn't know what to make of it. It took years for people to understand John Carpenter, to the point where now all of his movies have been remade, and Carpenter, regrettably, is sitting in his house and not making any films. And there's another guy I would love to talk with, and I just basically, Carpenter, God, we needed you during the Bush administration.
I hear they've long loved his films in France, though.
Yes, they have, just as they've loved Brian De Palma's films. I mean, and the thing is there's something about, and I'm mentioning these names, and you notice how I'm going for entertainers. Entertainers who have a kind of, have some smarts to them and some kind of perspective to them. These are the people I think I've really enjoyed the most through the years, and it's not that I'm against highfalutin literary types, but I just think that on some level, you can. And I mean, I don't know. Maybe this is wildly optimistic of me, but when I think of, I like the notion of an author who gets both the kind of some name recognition among a nation while simultaneously having some literary credibility. And I just don't see us having any author along those lines now. I mean, the last person who was possibly fit the bill, and I have obviously problems with him, is probably Jonathan Franzen. And he is a guy who was the last person really to have that idea of like, well, here is his latest book, the corrections, and this is the guy who you should read. That notion of a mass experience in literature is really fallen asunder, and really the only guys who have that are those who are over 50. Who have probably had a good chunk of their books turned into films. And I don't know, why can't we have authors on television? Why can't we make books coverage entertaining? Why can't we get people gushing with the same kind of enthusiasm about books as they do about films or music or Britney Spears or, Zac Efron or whoever? I mean, this notion that we have to go ahead and only focus in on a small minority and also on those who are young and those who are attractive. I just find that to be and I'm not against people who are young and attractive, but I just think that we should have a broader expanse of what we celebrate. I mean, it's a very, very simple proposition that I really wish our media system allowed for. hence things like podcasts, like your radio show that do try to find little people or ideas. Maybe this really, going back to tie this into the marketplace of ideas. Maybe this is the marketplace of ideas, I think.
And of course, tying this back into the limitations of radio. And now for a cruel illustration of the limitations of radio, we have actually reached the end of the program. The show, once again, is the Bat Segundo Show. The website is edrantz.com. The blog is Reluctant Habits. Edward Champion, thank you so much for taking the time to share your opinions and thoughts and ideas on this show.
Thank you so much, Colin. And to paraphrase Nardwuar, keep on rocking the free world.
Check out all of Edward Champion's work at edrantz, that is edrantz.com. This has been the Marketplace of Ideas. I have been Colin Marshall. Our music is by Ben Althouse. Check out, listen to, and see more of his work at benalthouse.com. Find our complete Marketplace of Ideas, interview archive, and more fun stuff at colinmarshallradio.com. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.